Guys, welcome to the new episode of the First Responder Playbook. I'm joined today by Mr. Whiskey, who is the host of the Couple O Nukes podcast, U.S. Navy veteran, speaker, podcaster, modern day preacher who's turning trauma into transformation. His podcast, Couple O Nukes, where raw conversations about suicide, addiction, faith, and recovery help listeners rebuild their lives. From the military to ministry to mentoring Gen Z, he brings gritty wisdom, real life experience, and a message of hope that doesn't hold back. Mr. Whiskey, thanks for joining me today.
And thank you for having me. It's great to be here. I work a lot with first responders and military members, especially mental health, suicide prevention, awareness, and addiction. As you know from hosting your show, first responders have a much higher rate of all of those.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm thankful that, I've been in law enforcement almost going on 11 years full time now. And I'm grateful over the last 5 years that mental health journey has started changing in a positive direction for a lot of guys. Originally, it was kind of like a suffer in silence type thing. And, thankfully now we're moving towards actually getting help for people that need it.
For sure, I agree. And one of the biggest things I think needs to be highlighted more is what police officers, especially, see and go through. So many people, especially in the most recent years, there's been a lot of anti police movements, defund the police, police brutality, and this and that. But just from being the son of a man who was a police officer for 25 years and hearing some of the horror stories from him, as well as hosting first responders on my podcast, I've gotten to experience, their firsthand accounts of some of the things they have seen, from suicide scenes that they had to show up to and clean and report on, to performing CPR on dying people who, passed away in their arms. People forget what cops do. They have this kind of very stereotypical social media, mainstream media image in their head, and they don't actually picture all the stuff that goes on behind the scenes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's so many people that see just a whole bunch of stuff that the general population probably never sees. And then you have to process that. And unfortunately, for the longest time, they didn't process it in a healthy manner. You're exactly right. That's why the alcohol, the substance abuse, domestic violence, all that stuff is very high in first responders. And luckily, we're starting to get a little bit better in that, slowly but surely.
Yeah, for sure.
So, tell me about your upbringing. You kind of told me that you had a little bit of a rough upbringing. Tell me about that.
For sure, the number one word I like to use to describe it is controlling. So, growing up in that sheltered home where parents kind of pick your friends and enemies for you, they have a lot of say over everything you do, not going out and socializing much, not meeting a lot of people, a lot of religious weaponization, a lot of verbal abuse, emotional abuse. And part of that, I think, kind of stems back to, I never really thought of it this way, but one day my grandfather on my mother's side said, Mr. Whiskey, your father probably has seen some of the worst parts of the world. And so he's going to want to be a little more protective. But I think sometimes parents get controlling in their protective nature rather than guiding. And it's more important to, I like someone had made an analogy the other day on my show. Instead of shooting the bow and arrow for, your children, help guide them, show them how far to pull back and where to aim and stuff like that. But it was kind of that combined with his ongoing addiction, which started before he was an officer. Obviously, it perpetuated quickly as he became a cop. He was, unfortunately, he suffered from, he was in a chain of command where they were kind of experimenting with his sleep cycles. So at one point, he was 12-hour shifts, 1 month straight of days, 1 month of nights. Then they changed it to, all right, 2 weeks on days, 2 weeks nights. Like his body, I mean, it's not natural, and I'm sure you've done plenty of rotating shift work, and they've gotten slowly better at it, trying to calculate the ideal thing. But at the end of the day, we know it's not ideal at all. You can only kind of maximize or minimize the negative effects of it. And so dealing with the insomnia, the changing sleep schedule, all the stuff he saw perpetuated his alcoholism more and more. And then when he retired, it was a huge change for him because, you know, as you know, with many first responders and military members, because the career is your lifestyle as much as it is your job. It gets you on your days off. It calls you into the station or the ship or wherever on your days off, on holidays, on night shifts. Everywhere you go, you're kind of seeing things. Like my father on his days off, he couldn't turn it off. If he saw someone parked in a no parking zone, like even the smallest thing, and so because it's your lifestyle, it becomes such a part of your identity. Many people are still a cop when they're off of work. Many people are still a soldier or a sailor. And to a degree, it's good to keep some of the good qualities, some of the good traits you learn about attention to detail and being hyperactive and all that. But some people just never turn off. And so when they retire, my father, I mean, that really changed his whole world. It's one of the most major moments for first responders. And then at the same exact time, his mother passed away. So that year was just a year that really everything fell apart.
You touch on a couple of things that I don't think people really necessarily realize that aren't in that world. Shift work for sure. I've never personally worked the ones where they've, worked like a week, a couple weeks of day shift and a couple weeks of night shift. But I've also purposely stayed away from agencies that I've seen do that
Right.
because it's hard enough as is when you do it every 6 months or every year, like a lot of agencies do. That it's not natural to work overnights anyways, and then to flip your schedule back and forth. I mean, it's rough. I worked overnight 12-hour shifts for, gosh, 5 years, and just to have a normal social life, if you wanna call it that, um, to talk to your family, friends, stuff like that, I had to flip my schedule my first day off. And, I
Yeah.
would go to bed at like 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning, and then I was up by like 1 or 2
Hmm.
just on my first day, just to have a normal day, like your 2nd day off or 3rd day off. And it was rough because you're just totally exhausted that first day, and everybody's like, "Well, why don't you wanna come out and do something? You wanna go outside and, like, go to Buffalo Wild Wings or something?" And you're so tired, you're just like, "Man, I just wanna stay home and, like, go back to bed." And your friends that aren't in that career don't understand that. Your family doesn't understand that. Like, they're like, "Hey, come over and eat dinner." Man, I'm exhausted. I don't want to do anything. And so, like,
Yeah.
that's rough, especially when you have a family. I don't want to say luckily. Um, and and then you do it for so long. I've struggled with this part in that I've tried to separate the job from Brent Colbert. So I try to when I'm not not working, I really don't want I've got friends that all they want to do is talk about the job.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I try to stay so far away from work outside of it. Not because I hate it, it's just because when you're there, it's so consuming, that
Hmm.
culture of like always being on guard, always being on duty. Like, I've tried to not let it consume my life because I've seen how it does consume people's lives. And, you're exactly right, it takes over of always, like, sitting to your back against the wall, watching the door of a restaurant, like, it's draining to be so emotionally on guard all the time, and, it consumes people, and I try my best still to this day to, like, have non-law enforcement outlets when I'm not at work. Like, everybody makes fun of me all the time because, like, I love sports, like football, baseball, whatever it may be, but I do that because I don't want the job to consume me. Like, I want to just
Yeah.
not focus about that when I'm not at work. Love the job, love being a cop, but I don't want it to take over my life because I've seen what it does to people who don't have those outlets.
Yeah. And for me, I know when I was working at a acid plant, blue collar side, there's a lot of shift work as well at this chemical plant. We were doing every few days, you were switching your sleep schedule. That was rough. And then when I was in the Navy working on a moored submarine, we also did it. We had 3 rotations. So it was 8 to 2000 day shift, and then you would go to noon to midnight swing shift, and then midnights, which would be, like 2000 to 8 a.m. about relatively. and we created this thing called SWIDs, which was swings to mids, and people would like the first night just have this huge alcohol fest to knock themselves out to transition their sleep, and it, it not I don't recommend it, right? I don't encourage it. A lot of people did that though, and the thing is, you're talking about you're exhausted, yet you also can't sleep because your body is just so confused about when do I sleep, when do I not sleep. You've got the blackout curtains up. I'm sure, I've had my fair share of blackout curtains, and it's every few days is really rough. I mean, I just always found that working night shift, I just could not sleep during the day. I mean, from like 1 a.m. to 5 a.m., that final stretch, that was when I was just like about to pass out. And then I would get home and like I'm awake again. It's daytime. And it's just like, where did all that sleepiness go? Because it's not here now that I need it. You wake up and also it's hard to control your environment during the daytime where you've got landscapers outside, you've got kids running and screaming. And then the worst part too is when you're working midnights and swings, like you can never you gotta stay up during the day to get your errands done because everyone's up during the day. So now you're giving up your sleep to go get your oil changed or, go grocery shopping, whatever it is. So it's not convenient. The world isn't set up to accommodate, midnight workers.
100%. And I'll never forget, I finally got to go to day shift for a little bit, right when I bought my house, right as COVID started. And I was so excited because, I bought a house in a new addition. Like, there's like houses being built around me. It's loud. And I'm like, sweet, I'm finally going to be able to like work when all this is going on. And I'll never forget, like, I got sent right back to nights. I don't remember why I got sent back to nights now, but I got sent back to nights. And so, like, it was just rough trying to sleep with like new construction being going on all around you. And I'm like, like I had the
Yeah,
blackout curtains going. I had like noise canceling headphones in, and like it was just
everything you can
rough.
do. Yeah.
Yeah, and and then you're supposed to like go to work and like manage it. It's rough. Um, so how did you decide finally that after growing up, you get to the high school age and you're like, I'm going to join the Navy? How did you decide I want to join the Navy? And then like, how did you decide I'm going to go down the nuclear submarine route? Because that's actually kind of you hear about it, but from somebody coming in the heartland, like there's not a bunch of people that you work on nuclear subs around here. So, can you talk about that a little bit?
For sure. So, like I mentioned earlier, I don't get to make my own decisions when I was growing up, So, as quick as I could say this, my whole life had been set up for the Coast Guard Academy. That's what my
Uh,
parents always pushed for, what they always wanted me to do. Summer programs, talking to people in government, right? Getting ready to do that. But it was their dream. And a lot of times, and most people know this now, that if you try to force your dream onto your children, they end up really resenting it. You want your kids to do something because instill in them a curiosity for it or a passion for it. But the way my parents went about it was so controlling and so this, like, and telling me this is what you want. Why are you gonna tell me what I want? And eventually I got a job as an ice cream salesman on the beach, and everyone was asking, hey son, what are you doing are you saving up money for college? Why are you working a job? Trying to get a car? I said, no, I'm going to the Coast Guard Academy. Funny enough, that job too, my mom just I came home one day, my mom was like, "I got you a job. You start work tomorrow." It's like, so that everything has always been, her control. And people were like, "Well, what do you want to do, Mr. Whiskey?" I said, "Me? I have a choice. I didn't know that. Thank you." And I said, "I'd like to be an entrepreneur and a creator and definitely an author." And I was always really passionate about creating and working. Definitely wanted to own my own restaurant or business. And, they convinced me eventually. They said, well, if that's what you want to do that. Don't go to the Coast Guard Academy just because your parents are telling you, you're a kid now. But once you turn 18 and you graduate, it's really your life. And you don't want to look back and regret, living a life that wasn't yours. And so I decided to not go to the Coast Guard Academy, walked away from that opportunity. And then COVID hit right as I was graduating. And I didn't even complete my senior year in the terms of they said, "We're taking a 2-week break," and then we never came back,
Wow.
diplomas in the mail. So, it was, like, right when COVID first hit and everything went to chaos, and so the working world kinda shut down, and so that route kinda closed, and college was an option for me because my parents had never educated me on it. I had this totally misconceived notion about what college was, and I talked about going to community college and then transferring over once I figured things out. And my parents said no. Specifically, my dad said, community college is for minorities and bums, and no son of mine will go there. And so that was closed. And so eventually they pressured me into military again. Went Air Force the day before I shipped out to MEPS to get everything done. They changed the job on me that I wanted. So I was going for photojournalism. Oh, we can't get you that. They said they could, guaranteed, but, they changed their verbiage at the end, said, "No, no, I said I could try and get you that. I never said guaranteed," and, pulled the rug from under me and said, "You're gonna be a cryptolinguist. You're gonna learn another language, and then you're gonna spy and translate and spend, like, at some point, he mentioned spending 14 hours in a plane. I said, "I've never been in a plane in my life, and I'm not starting with 14 hours." Throw me in the deep end of the pool there, so I looked at the other jobs in the Air Force because I said, well, there's a lot of things: pest control, mailman, construction, store clerk, everything civilian side. There was a military version of it. I said, honestly, why don't I just get an easy job? My parents were hated that idea because of their pride, but for me, it was like I still get medical, dental, food, housing. Like, who cares what job I do? Honestly, I wasn't like, I respected war heroes, but I didn't feel the need to be one. And then my parents were like, "Nope, no son of ours is doing anything other than that top cryptolinguist job because, you're a whiskey and our pride." And it was always about them, never me. And so I walked away from the Air Force because of that whole changing last minute. But the thing with COVID was getting worse and worse. And so I ended up going to a Navy recruiting office. Had a terrible experience. It was gray, dimly lit. Everyone hated their lives and everyone was a jerk. And I was like, they convinced me to never join any military branch. My mom was like, no, 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 no. Maybe you caught them on a bad day. Takes me to a different recruiting office, which isn't even allowed because they had started paperwork with me, and they were sunny, bright lights. "Hey, come in, watch Netflix, have some pizza. Let me tell you about all these fun stories. Let me leave out everything else." And, they convinced my mom. She loved it. So, at 17, my parents forced me to join the Navy, so to speak, and I was going for photojournalism, once again, mass communications. I wanted to do that. They said, "Nope." So I was going for underwater welding, and then they said, "Well, we looked at your ASVAB scores. We'd really like you to be a nuclear operator. It's the hardest job, the worst job. You'll hate your life, but it's the most benefits." And I said to myself, "Well, I already don't want to be here. So I might as well try to get the most benefits out of it if I'm gonna be forced to go through this horrible situation, might as well just go through a slightly worse version of it and get more benefits." What I didn't realize was that the extra benefits were only if you stayed nuclear blue collar side post-military. Guess what? A higher ranking mailman in the Navy got paid more than a nuclear operator. That's just how it works. It's based off of
Wow.
rank, and all the benefits are the same, whether you're a veteran who served XYZ years or ABC years, or whether you were a construction man or a torpedo dude, you still got medical, dental, food, housing, right? So it just, at the end of the day, yes, there was a bonus for being a nuclear operator, ways to rank up faster, great resume. But, I didn't wanna stay nuclear side post-military, and so I kinda got swindled, and that led to my journey into the Navy. And the submarine was part of, the training that all nuclear operators go through. I ended up on an aircraft carrier because I didn't wanna go sub. I almost changed my mind after working on the live submarine for training. I said, "I kinda like this." I liked it a lot, but not enough, not more than sunlight and fresh air. So
So, did you go through basic during COVID?
yes, and that was, I think my boot camp is a very unique one that, no one else can really say they went through as well, because the divisions after me had a different experience, the divisions before me, all throughout COVID. And for people who don't know, the military was still in the COVID quarantine months after the civilian world. So months after the civilian world lifted the mask, lifted all this stuff, all the mandates, military said, we need us to be the front line if anything happens. And if the civilian world is wrong, we'll be ready. That was the kind of idea that we gotta be extra precautious. And that's everything in the military is always even more precautious than we need to be. And that's a good thing. Now I hated it because I hated wearing a mask. Now I would have never worn one if the military didn't force me to.
That's crazy that a crazy time to go through boot camp, you know? So did you guys have to enforce like all the distancing and
Yes
you,
and
you know
no. So that was the beauty of the confusion. You've got one RDC yelling 6 feet, and then you got another one yelling heel to toe, stand in line, right up against each other. So you got conflicting orders, and it's always, one RDC will come up to you and say, why are you staying 6 feet apart? Stand next to each other. Well, this RDC, well, I said so. And then that RDC will come over. Well, why aren't you standing 6 feet apart? Well, that guy said, well, I told you to do this, right? Why are you listening to him? And it just became a lot of things that normally you go through boot camp, I didn't go through because of the requirements. So, like the going through the gas chamber, we did some parts of it, but not all of it because of COVID. And I don't know, some of it didn't make sense. Some of the firefighting stuff we didn't do. It was also a scary time to go through boot camp in the sense that anyone who had any symptoms, the slightest cough, you got set back into a 2-week quarantine in boot camp. So basically, 2 extra weeks of boot camp. Not just you, but anyone within one rack of you. So every time one person had a symptom, all 6 people got quarantined. So my division started with almost 100 people. We were down to like 20 at some point because they were just quarantining. And the quarantine was you're in boot camp, no TV, no phone. You're sitting in this little space, dimly lit. You've got a book about naval history and commands. You've got people patrolling in uniform yelling at you. You get this little bag lunch. It's like a piece of white bread with one slice of ham and mayonnaise. Like the quarantine food was terrible, terrible because they weren't allowed to go to the galley. You had to get these bag meals, and they needed hundreds on hundreds of them. Oh, it was just terrible. The only thing nice that people said was that the military always were the first people to get toilet paper. So
so did yours get extended?
no, luckily that was the biggest fear. So I had to quarantine the first 2 weeks of boot camp. Everyone did to get there, then go through boot camp, and then I had like a few days to wait to ship out to where I was, and luckily, no. It got to the point where my RDC was so tired of losing people that if you were in the rack next to someone who quote had symptoms, almost none of these people were actually sick. He would say, "Were you sleeping facing them or facing away?" He arranged the bed so now everyone was facing away from each other, so they didn't. He never breathed in his face, like because my RDC was sick of it because I mean you have these some recruits were there for months, months. And then you had people who this is just how evil people are. People who would fake symptoms just to like get out of doing some job. Like we had a guy, he was put in charge of doing our laundry. 5 minutes later, I have COVID, I have corona, disappears, takes 6 other people with him. And all because he didn't want to do laundry that day. Now you have 2 more weeks of boot camp. I could never ever want to do that. Why would you want to be in boot camp any longer than you already have to be? But some people said, hey, boot camp time counts as service time. So if I just keep getting into quarantine, I can cut time off of my contract that I actually have to serve. I mean, it was a crazy time.
That's wild. Um, so you finish that up, you go through your advanced training, not really necessarily what you wanted. Looking back on it, did you enjoy what you ended up doing? Because over the long term, you're kind of doing content creation and stuff on your own
Yeah, yeah.
now, and we'll get
Everything
to
lined
that.
up.
But do you look back positively on your time in the military?
There was a pivot point. The first part of training A school, first 6 months, I hated it. I did not want to be there. I hated everything about it. There was a pivot point where I kinda got a little I got the bug, so to speak, the Navy spirit, the lone sailor vibe, and I started studying and getting higher grades and being huya, and what I experienced is if you hate the military, You're called a dirtbag, a scumbag. Everyone gives you a hard time. You hate your life. If you love the military, now everyone else who hates the military hates you. So you can never win. You can never win. The reason I lost it is because I got so infected with the Navy spirit that I was trying for this certain promotion. I worked 16 hours a day. So I was working 4 extra hours, giving the Navy 4 extra hours a day for no extra pay, nothing, right? But helping people stay in a nuke program who were going to get kicked out. I stayed behind to tutor them, to help them get the training and qualifications they needed. I had 8 letters of recommendation for this promotion. Everyone told me it was guaranteed. A captain told me to my face that he would sign the paperwork. It was guaranteed. When it came down to it, they gave my gave it away to someone, quote, for diversity. So they gave someone who was Filipino because, quote, we didn't have enough Asian instructors, the promotion. And then they, quote, didn't have room for me, even though we were so understaffed that they had to involuntarily promote for over 40 people who did not want the position to be a nuclear instructor. Once the politics got involved and screwed me over, and this was foreshadowed to me, I didn't understand it. I asked a guy who had been promoted to the promotion I was chasing, like, "How did you do it? I'm trying really hard. I'm working 16 hours a day." And when you work 16 hours a day, I went home, I slept, I had nightmares about being on the submarine because I had just been on it for 16 hours and it wouldn't leave my mind. Then I would wake up and go there, barely ate, barely slept. I asked him what more I could do, and he said, "Have you ever seen another Indian in the nuclear Navy?" I said, "No, sir. You're the only one I've met." He goes, "I was told I met a special billet, and that's how I was promoted." And in my head, I said, "Okay, so I mean, some of the people here are getting promoted for diversity. That doesn't really affect me." I never said to myself, "They're taking spots from you," because I figured that's an extra billet. I figured they said, "Well, they must have put an extra spot to the side." They didn't. So after that, I really stopped caring, and, I just really began to hate the Navy again, and then there were so many issues with medical. I saw so many people being delivered injustice from leadership. I've listened to some episodes of your podcast on leadership and couldn't agree more with the military. One of the biggest issues that I always talk about on my show is the leadership. From the Vietnam veterans to 9/11 era to when I recently got out, all the same complaints about leadership. We're slowly seeing some changes, but it's taken a very long time. It's going to take a very long time. And I just saw so many people screwed over by Navy medical, by their chains of command. I saw people in charge who hated their lives and took it out on us. And I said, I'm leaving. I gave extra time and got nothing in return, but basically told to go F myself, as the Navy would say respectfully. And so I got out, and as much as I hate the military for the bad sides of it, I've worked with a lot of people who it really changed their lives, it benefited their lives. I have a lot of respect for the men and women serving this country, and I do a lot of work on the veteran side, the active duty mental health and suicide prevention awareness, because it's my way to because I did live through it and because I did serve with those people and some of my best friends are still serving, I'm still a part of that community and in a way that I enjoy and that is beneficial to people, but in a way that's not screwing me over or contributing to them. If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's uh, I kind of laugh at this. During COVID, I first tried to jump into podcasting, and I did audio only at the time. And I told you that I try to keep it away from law enforcement stuff as much as I can outside of work. And I love paranormal stuff like ghosts, Bigfoot, aliens, like I just do. And so that was my first foray into podcasting, was a paranormal podcast, and I quit during COVID just because it was such a weird time. And but I've always had a love of podcasting. Like I listen to them all the time. I mean, you're in a car 8, 10, 12 hours a day. And so I was like, you know what? I'm gonna give it a try because I'm so sick and tired of bad leadership at a lot of places.
Mhm.
And I was like, why not do a first responder theme podcast over leadership training, share other people's stories because that's an outlet to get new ideas out there into the community because you're exactly right. First responders, military, there's a lot of bad leadership. And that's why I try to, I love Podmatch for what they do because it's connected me to a lot of people that have leadership ideas that are not in the community. Um, because why would we continue to promote those bad things of leadership styles that they've always done? And if these people that are not in the community have new ideas and new ways of doing things, like that's my small way of sharing their message to help change things. And so I I love doing this podcast just for that fact. Like I may never get huge in the podcasting world, and I'm cool with that. Like I enjoy what I do, but it helps change the culture slowly and bring these new ideas in because it's needed for so many different ways of like bad leadership, and that's why when I became a frontline supervisor, like I tried to always do things that were opposite of what my bad leaders did because
Yeah.
it was just brutal. And like I had a supervisor one time that like a Marine Corps vet that like he never, I don't think, processed his issues from the military, and he just took it out on people that he worked with because he never took care of his issues. And I never want to go down that route. I don't like ever wish bad on the guy or anything like that. But like we were just like oil and water at work, and and so I tried to just do things the exact opposite the way he did. So here I am, and I enjoy it, and
Yeah.
we're gonna keep doing the good fight.
Yeah. Well,
So
I'll tell you one thing I'll never forget from the leadership example. I had a master chief say to me, "I don't have to justify myself. I wear an anchor with 2 stars. I can do what I want." Like, basically, my way is right. Justice is justified by rank, which is not true at all, right? I think there are ways to hold leadership accountable, but there's a lot of red tape. There's a lot of people protecting their own that happens, especially up in leadership, you know. So it's very difficult, especially for new people coming into an environment that is so already cemented in ways that are toxic or poor leadership. But the idea that, that would be like a sheriff saying, "Well, I wear this badge, so whatever I do is right." It's and I listened to your episode where we talked about, the power that corrupts,
yep,
and so that's what a lot of leaders go through, and there's a difference between I like your guest said, like, misuse of power and abuse of power, 2 very different things, and a lot of times, unfortunately, there are people who are intentionally abusing their power. A lot of times the a lot of times it comes down to laziness. In the military, there's a lot of tasking off stuff you don't wanna do to other people below you, and that just comes down to laziness and just, a rank doesn't justify not doing your job and doesn't justify
exactly.
that your personal beliefs, are what need to now be enforced, and there's a lot of things that get ignored in the military that, if the UCMJ was actually held to a standard and different things, the actual naval guidelines for sleep and for health and for fitness, that a lot of these places would be shut down. I'm sure same with and I'm sure law enforcement has guidelines by the government or the state or wherever of what your work conditions are supposed to be, and I'm sure they're not being met.
Yep, absolutely. I I've never that's actually something that's very passionate to me is your rank does not justify you getting out of doing your job. And to this day, like I mean, there's some guys that I love to death, but like they let those you know sergeant chevrons get to them, and they're like, I'm so busy doing this. I'm like, dude, you still got a job to do, and I'm with you on that 100%. So you get out of the military. How did you finally realize your passion of finally getting to do content creation? You know, starting a podcast, going down that journey, because that's where you originally wanted to be, and now you're here.
Yeah,
So how'd you
yeah.
get there?
Full circle moment, glory to God that I think I always said at some point to myself, I said, I feel like God took me through the nuclear program not to be a nuke, but to experience certain things and meet certain people to do what I do now. I mean, that's where this all originated, a couple of nukes. I was listening to podcasts. I was driving about 16 hours a weekend, a few times a month. And so, like you said, I mean, you can listen to music for only how many hours? You kind
Yeah.
of get bored of it. You start drifting off. So I started listening to podcasts, comedy podcasts, and they had life advice mixed in, and nuclear operators are a very small percentage of a very small percentage of people who can join the military, especially the ones who actually make it out to the fleet because of the high suicide and dropout rate. And so, when I personally feel this is very true, and historically, if you look at historical figures, the smarter people are, the more weird they are. Usually, they're a little more
Yeah.
eccentric, and they just work in a different way. Geniuses, don't get me wrong, but socially socially ignorant sometimes. Nukes, a lot of them, especially on the high spectrum of nukeness, very egotistical, very technical about stuff, very like talking to nukes. I often describe it as you're in court. You're in like science court or whatever, or history court. Like they're very technical and stuff, and they're known for nuking it out. So focusing on small details, having these conversations, lacking common sense. And so when you get a couple of nukes together, the conversation can be super, super, fun, super annoying, super dramatic. And I was sitting down and we were having one of those conversations, and I said, wow, look at us, a couple of nukes talking, and like, I want to show this with the world, and at the same time highlight this suicide rate that is so high. We had 1 to 3 suicides a month at one point at our base, so highlighting the issues, but also sharing the comedy and beauty of the nuclear community, and helping nukes who are brand new and have been in, as well as just, military in general. But I always jokingly call the show Just a Nuke because it's just me. A lot of nukes were like, no, I don't have time. I rather podcasting. No, I rather be drinking and getting drunk, or sleeping, or having a lot of sex. And so no other nukes were really in on it. And once I got out, that community is very like in the nuclear community in the Navy. And then when you get out, it kind of branches off. There's some Facebook groups and stuff like that. But, once a nuke, always a new kind of ordeal. But, kind of start living your own life. And so I was already doing the podcast. I said, well, until I find a couple of nukes to host with me, I guess I'll just do all military branches. And so I started doing military health and mental health and all that. But I got niched down to just this veteran helping veterans kind of guy, which is great. Don't get me wrong. Like that is my passion. But I do so much more than just that. And I wanted to do so much more than that. I didn't want to help just military members. I want to help everyone. And so I branched out to overall self-improvement, and I now do everything from women's menstrual health to flying airplanes to stock investments to suicide prevention and better sleep hygiene. Because the idea is that not every episode is for everyone, but everyone has an episode for them. And you can get something from every episode. It might just not be something applicable to your life to improve, but great knowledge to have. And so my show, I ended up making it to be something that builds community, that shares resources, and that people can improve their lives. And I've kept a couple of nukes because that was the origin of where it started. And so, kind of to circle back to what you said, I am grateful for everything that I went through in the military and even my traumatic childhood, because what has given me a voice of relatability, of empathy, of authority and knowledge to speak on all these subjects, to really connect with my guests about these subjects, and to make a change and to continue to just make bigger and bigger projects. I think a lot of people say that there are just certain qualities they took away from the military that they'll always be grateful for. High work drive, discipline, certain things that you take away. And I think the military is one of those things, like any life situation, you can take as much away from it as you can, or as little as you want, but either way you still have to go through it.
Yeah, absolutely. I can relate to that so much. Um, And I'm with you on that. And like my podcast originally was just like, I wanted to just talk about first responder topics. And then I got in here and I'm like, okay, like there's so much more outside of just that small niche, kind of like you said, that I've started bringing on other guests because it's okay to like branch out and, bring these other new ideas into the first responder world. And so like kind of like you, like I love that you're just like, I'm not gonna put myself in just a little box. And like, I was looking through like your website and like all these different guests and topics. And I love that because there's somebody out there that listens to your podcast that relates to probably every single one of those. And, even if you touch one person with your podcast, like you're doing a service to the world. And I love that. So how many seasons are you in now in your podcast?
Yeah, so today was the last episode of season 7, so I'll be moving on to season 8. The seasons are 50 episodes long, but the first few seasons weren't because originally when I first started out the show, it was every few weeks. It was very inconsistent trying to get nukes together. I was still active duty doing a lot of stuff. Then, I got Civilian World got a little more consistent weekly show, and the seasons were like, I don't know. I was trying to beat them at like, okay, from September to June, and then or I had like from January to New Year to June, and then a summer, and then eventually once I went every other day with my show, I had so many episodes that I was like, if I were to make a season based on the summer and fall, winter, I mean, there would be 100, 200 episodes. So I decided to go ahead and make it every 50 episodes is a new season. I feel like that's a pretty good chunk. I'd like to go daily eventually, but right now it's just me, just a nuke by myself. And so it's a lot. I'm sure being a podcast host, the emails, the scheduling, the editing, the posting, the social media, the thumbnail. There's so many little moving parts that to do it by yourself daily, I mean, it would be a lot. Plus all the recording time. I've had 10-hour recording days back to back to back just to get, 1 week ready. So it's a lot, but I do love the work. I'm very what do they say, like, get a job that you're passionate in and you'll never feel like you work. That's what I do. I love this. I love sitting down recording with people, even editing. You listen back, you get new insights. And like you said, I've had people reach out and say, like, hey, this episode changed my life. And that means everything to me because every day I'm sure you can relate to this. Every day I'm competing against these videos on Instagram and X and Facebook and TikTok that get millions of views and likes, and they're this it's an AI generated video of a cat exploding, and it get millions of likes. And I've got my wholesome content about suicide prevention, and it gets, a couple likes and shares, and that's it. And it's we're competing against a world that indulges in sexual immorality and violence and gore and humor more than anything. So getting those personal kind of, hey, this episode reached me, it kind of counteracts all that, fluff, so to speak. But it's still difficult, but I just put my content out and I say, God, I know that you'll get it to the right person at the right time. I don't worry about algorithms. I don't worry about likes or any of that stuff. All I need is God to get it to someone. And I always get a little chill at the idea of this conversation you and I are having might change someone's life 100 years after you and I are dead, and they might be like, man, those two guys, those years ago, they recorded this show and it's still relatable to me today. I hope not. I hope the leadership has changed and they're like, man, leadership back in the day, I can't believe they allowed that stuff. They used to allow smoking in airplanes and they used to allow first responder leaders to suck. Not
Yeah.
anymore. That's illegal now. But, it's about, creating content that is consistent and evergreen and just knowing that it will reach the right person at the right time.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. That and you're exactly right. I just it's frustrating sometimes because you're out there competing against these crazy videos that will get a million views and there's nothing of value to them at all, and people watch them, and
For hours.
you're like, man, I put in 6 hours of work to get this episode out, and I may get 100 views. But at the end of the day, if I can touch one of those 100 views, it was worth it to me. And so I'm glad that we both share that passion of we're here to help, not necessarily be the biggest or best. And that's what we're here for. And you're absolutely right. And a lot of people don't realize that one episode may take an hour to actually record, but then there's so much more on the back end just to get it out. And there's so much I've still got to learn about the thumbnail video or the thumbnail images, and I'll get there. But right now, I'm just enjoying doing the podcast all the time, and we've got a job to do and share our message, and we're here enjoying it. So let me ask you this. I'm gonna wrap up on 3 questions.
Okay.
My first one is, what is your all-time favorite episode of A Couple of Nukes?
Mm, that is a great question. And there's a lot of different angles I could look at that from, like, because there was an episode that almost brought me to tears, right? And so I would say that's a very emotionally moving episode. And then there's my most popular episode. So I would say, hmm, there's a lot of shows I reference all the time, because sometimes you just learn stuff you never imagined. I want to say the episode that is my favorite is probably my most popular one, which, was back when far from my it's far from one of my best episodes quality wise and all that wise. And I definitely want to have that guest back on, but it was Gen Z suicide prevention and integrating faith into social media ads to reach people who have been disconnected from faith because of social media. Just it's a simple ad as some of them 16 different campaigns, some as simple as just swiping through Instagram, you're suicidal and depressed, and you come across this reel that says, "Hey, life hurts, but Jesus cares." Click to learn more, and it's a suicide prevention line and stuff like that. So I have to say that is my number one most popular episode. There was a point in time where every day someone was listening to it, and I really hope that people took something away from that. I mean, and I just when I posted about the season 7 finale this morning, which was just a regular episode. Um, I said, what's so amazing is not only that these 50 new guests that were on the show, but some of them are collaborators and friends that I talk to every day. Podcasting is a form of community building, as I mentioned. And so sometimes it's not even the episode's content itself, but the person behind the episode that is really what touches me more than anything.
I agree wholeheartedly. I love that. I love that there's a struggle that you're like, I've had so many good guests that you're like,
Yeah.
which one do I choose? Because that means you're doing the right thing.
Yeah.
So, two more. Somebody looking to join the military. What is something, a sage word of advice you can give them when they join the military?
A guest who was on my show, I believe it was Peter Gunn, in fact, he said, I asked him, "Why did you join the Air Force?" He said, "Well, I was smart about it. I went to the VA hospital and I interviewed all the, veterans there. I said, if you had to do the military again, starting from when you first enlisted, what would you do differently?" And every Marine, Navy guy, and Army guy said, "I would have joined the Air Force." So he joined the Air Force. And so, my thing is, and on a similar sense, I believe it was Rob Wheeler, Coach Rob said, if you don't go talk to veterans, bring one or someone who actually knows the service with you to the recruiting office. Now you can do either or both, but I think getting that real experience because look, I'm not saying recruiters are bad people, right? They have a job to do. They're salespeople, and I have met some really honest recruiters. I've met some really, really bad recruiters who just told terrible lies, and withholding the truth and telling lies are two different things. The actual lie telling, I've seen some recruiters post confession videos like, "This is how I got so many people to join this division. I promised them that they could cross rate into Navy SEALs or Special Forces, and that was a total lie. And they could never find me." But talking to people and getting the real story, whether and maybe it's listening to podcasts, listening to episodes like this. But I think going to the VA hospital or an American Legion and talking to some of the veterans and talk to a variety of them, get the good and the bad, and then weigh your options. The thing that I regret not doing is letting my parents bully me into when I was in that research phase. Because I went to do it. Look at the different jobs in the Air Force, look at the different jobs in the Army. Like, don't just settle. Find a job that you like. Again, all the military benefits will follow. So find the job that you would actually like doing if it was the worst case scenario. I've had a couple chefs on my show who regretted becoming a chef in the Navy because it killed their passion for it. So I would also caution you, the military version of whatever you love to do is going to be different, and it may kill your passion for it. So when you're researching those jobs, really, really think about it, and don't focus too much on the post transition. So many people pick a job because of this this misleading expectation of how it'll affect their civilian career. When in reality, sometimes it's just like, hey, you were in the military, cool, X, Y, Z. Sometimes it doesn't matter. So unless it's something very, very specialized, then think about it. And don't get too specialized and then you realize, "Oh shoot, now this is all I can do. Now I'm flipping burgers, I'm back to square one." So I think that research phase, from looking at the jobs on their websites to talking to actual veterans and active duty, do your research. Don't just show up to a recruiting office, say, "I'm changing my life today. I want to be a Marine." You know what happened to people on my show? They said that and they ended up in a rice paddy in Vietnam and said, I changed my mind. Don't just give me any job. I've had a lot of guys on my show. Give me whatever job, recruiter, you pick. Roulette. Do not play recruiter roulette. You will lose. You will lose recruiter roulette.
I love that, and you're absolutely right that don't pigeonhole yourself into like because I mean you're right. You'll let's just I'm just gonna pick something random, but like if somebody was like, "Hey, I'm military police," um, and then they get out and they think, "Well, all I can do is be a police officer." Don't limit yourself just to like say, "Hey, well, that's all I can do. That's all I know." Um, Continually be a professional and keep learning and like don't let that define you. Like
100%.
if you were a military policeman and you want to go be a chef, like go get that culinary training when you get out and go be a chef. Like chase your dreams, not what the government tells you that you can do.
Yeah. And learn
Um,
stuff while you're in to set yourself up. Like the military offers a lot of programs for active duty guys to like from skill bridge to online classes, whatever it is, like just because you're doing, like you said, if you're a military cop, don't hesitate to take military courses for other professions or interests. Like you can start working on your resume now. The Navy's not, or whatever branch isn't going to slap you on the wrist saying, "Hey, why are you taking a course in culinary? You should be taking a course in security and reenlist." They're going to tell you that because they want you to reenlist and be qualified, but set up, like, don't let them pressure you.
yeah, wholeheartedly agree. So now that you're doing your passion, what would you give new content creators, podcasters? What's your one piece of advice to them?
Mm. Whew. There's oh man, there's so much advice. I'm so passionate about podcasting, and I'm one of those guys. I read the stats every day, the new numbers and stuff like that. I find it very interesting, to read the stats. But I would say I think just put yourself first is what I would say. And what I mean is, I've personally experienced a lot of people have tried to give me their professional advice by trying to niche me or brand me or do X, Y, Z. I'm not a brand, I'm a person. Yes, I have a business and a brand, but at the end of the day, I come first in the sense that I will post what I want, I will do what I want, take actual feedback and criticism, but don't take opinions. There's a big difference, and it's really hard when you're content creating to kind of differentiate those. Like I'll give you an example. Like everything I do, people are against. So my show is for everyone. They say don't do that. They say niche down. They say, hey, sometimes you post stuff that isn't cowboy or oceanic. Yeah, because that's not all my life is consisted to. I don't just post my thumbnails or clips of my episodes only. I post about other stuff too, you know? And I think like I have comments disabled on my YouTube and my Instagram, except for people who actually follow me. People say, well, you're really killing your growth and algorithm this, algorithm that. My thing is, especially on Instagram, it is just such a playground of hate and racism and gore and sexual immorality that people will just drop hate comments on everything. All right. I see YouTube videos get dislikes, and it's like there's actually zero reasons that anyone should dislike this video. And obviously that sounds biased because I made it, but sometimes it's just like a clip about like, here's this wholesome piece of advice to do X, Y, Z. What reason would you have to dislike it, right? People just hate to hate, right? Everyone has opinions. And my thing is I want to minimize spreading sinful behavior. So I have my comment sections off because why should I give these people a platform? People say, well, what if good people want to reach you? Good people will take the extra step to email me or go to my website and find the ways to contact me, or they'll follow me and then comment. People who spread hate, they're pretty lazy people unless they're really dedicated to it. So if they can't comment, they'll just keep swiping. They're not going to find a way to try it because they want publicity. They're not going to
Yeah.
email me privately because that doesn't get them any reaction. And so a lot of people would be against that. They say bring the hate because the hate brings more attraction and more content. But think, do you? So many people will say, well, you should frame this episode or write this book this way to appeal to more people. I don't chase after people. I make what I like and it'll attract the right people and it'll get to the right people. So I say put yourself first. People are going to try to box you down and label you certain ways. I don't lead with I'm a veteran. Everyone says, make sure you lead with you're a veteran. So people, no, I don't lead with that because I don't want my identity to just be I'm a veteran. Just like I don't say I'm XYZ, this or that. People will say you should really, let people know, say you're a life coach and this and that. Like people will try to label you and box you down. And I've met a lot of people while podcasting who have tried to really stereotype me, brand me, do this. People will try to give you all this unsolicited advice that really isn't advice. It's really opinions. So I think make your content for you first and the rest will follow.
I love that.
Unpopular opinion.
No, no, I actually I love that 100%. So, where can everybody uh tell them about your website? Where can they get in contact with you at, and where can they listen to the show?
For sure. So coupleonukes.com. I always put that forward because you can find my show on a variety of different platforms. All my website links to Apple Podcasts or YouTube. But what I love about my website compared to listening platforms, I have it organized. So my episodes are categorized. So, like I said, you don't have to spend time scrolling through 200 episodes. You could say, hey, Vietnam War stories. You could say, hey, women's health, men's mental health, suicide prevention, addiction recovery, unique stories, comedy. I really like organizing it because the idea is I want everything to be as easy as possible for people to change their lives. And I put forward my website, even if you don't listen to my show, I have every guest that's ever been on the show and every show I've ever been on there and all their resources, their websites. So again, the idea is that my website is a resource hub. So you can listen to the episode, you can find books, courses, discounted programs from guests, their content. And I always put that forward. So coupleonukes.com, that's nukes, Nukes. And that has all my contact information as well. So if you want a guest on the show, you want to connect me with someone, you have questions or topic you want covered. And then I also have some books and some other stuff, events, and just different ways to connect with people. So you mentioned in the very beginning of the episode, I also do preaching and comedy and writing, speaking. All of that is the same as the podcasting, just different mediums to reach people. Some people need a more humorous approach. Some people need a more spiritual approach. Some people need something more grounded in the military. That's why like I personally don't curse, but there are some content creators that they curse like a sailor, so to speak. And some people that's what they're receptive to. They need to be cursed at and yelled at. I'm not that person. So I think that it's important. Like just like when I first started my show, I was like, I don't want to work with other guys who do military content or first responder content because we're competing. But then I quickly dropped that mentality and came to realization. We're all here to help people, if a person connects with Mr. Colbert better than Mr. Whiskey, then go enjoy his content. Like at the end of the day, it's about you. It's not about me. And I think that's an important mentality to keep too. But some people get so they turn their podcast into too much of a business. It's okay to make money off your podcast and content creation, enjoy what you do. But some people get so business that they kind of lose the whole original purpose and passion of helping people.
Yeah, and that's actually something I really want to touch on real quick is my flavor of podcast may not be for everybody.
Yeah.
Yours may not be either. Um, but why would we not celebrate each other and try to say, "Hey, check it out. You may fall in love with the Couple O Nukes podcast and like every episode, and like we're not competing against each other. We're here to celebrate each other and I want my buddies to succeed. Like same thing in law enforcement. Like, if we go arrest a guy with 6 felony warrants, like I want to celebrate my buddy doing that. And like then, when I go out there and arrest somebody with 7 felony warrants, like they're like, "Hey man, you did great." Like we're not here to compete against each other. We're here to celebrate and like do good things. And so same thing with podcasting. Like if somebody likes your podcast better than mine, rock on. Like enjoy it. And I'm glad I'm helped making those connections with those people. People need to realize that at the end of the day, like who cares? Like we're not here to compete. Like we're here to spread messages and to help other people. And so like, yeah, I'm with you on that. Like wholeheartedly, 100%. Like,
It's because social media and mainstream just sets everything up as a popularity competition, a day and age of celebrity and celebritization. And that's not what it's about. But people are getting so caught up on that. And I mean, I feel pity for them almost in the sense that, you look at some of these toddlers who are being given an iPad and they're basically being raised that more likes is more power, more shares is more power. I mean, they're basically being told you want to grow up to be a celebrity rather than a philanthropist or someone who helps people. We put forward celebrities instead of what if we gave our children a book and said, look at this man, Jesus Christ, look at all he did, and he wasn't a celebrity in the sense that, yeah, a lot of people loved him, but there was a lot of people who tried to tear him down, but instead we put up all these celebrities in Hollywood and on social media, and a lot of them are also doing terrible things that they get away with just because of popularity and money.
yep, I wholeheartedly agree. Guys, as we wrap up, Couple O Nukes, any streaming platform, YouTube, coupleonukes.com. Mr. Whiskey, you're always welcome back. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.